With the 4th pick in the 2004 NBA Draft, the New Orleans Hornets select Chris Paul from Wake Forest University.
Violent success that should fill this arena for many years to come. A standing ovation for Chris Paul, who picked up number 6. The numbers on Paul: 18 points, 14 assists, and I thought the Spurs did an excellent job containing Chris Paul here tonight.
Well, and you look at his numbers, it's a near triple-double, but how about one of the new faces of the league in Chris Paul? And, what he has done this year, second in MVP voting behind Kobe Bryant, really.
Just run the ball out, show a little sportsmanship here, and moving on. And that's exactly what J.R. Smith is doing. The Denver Nuggets have defeated the New Orleans Hornets 107-86, and they move on.
Odom, a wide open layup, gets the lead up to 20 there. He had 14 off the bench as the Lakers take the series 4-2, now awaiting the winner of the Portland Mavs series.
Can tie, no timeouts left, 1.7 seconds. Williams can't get a shot off, and that's how the Clippers' season ends, 102-99. The Spurs, first team since 1999 to record consecutive playoff sweeps. They've now won 18 in a row as they close on a 2011 run. They head to the Western Conference.
Paul down to 3, down to 2, trying to get it down low, and he stopped it, took it away. It's all over. The Oklahoma City Thunder have come from 15 back.
The wire up top. The Rockets will inbound, and this one will be over. Dwight Howard going back to the conference finals. He did it with Orlando. They made it to the finals before losing to the Lakers. And the comeback is complete. The Houston Rockets will play in their first conference final in 18 years as they win Game 7, wire to wire.
Plumlee makes a pair. No timeouts for the Clippers. They've got to go. Down 2, Crawford. A threat from 3 and 2. High pick coming from Rivers. Jamal Crawford. 4 seconds. Crawford to the middle for the tie. No. Rebound Plumlee. And he's fouled. 1.5 to go.
And he deflected that shot. Pretty good defense by the Blazers.
And with no timeouts left, the Clippers in trouble.
They have to go the length of the court on a miss.
To go, and the Golden State Warriors are on their way to a 4th consecutive NBA final. This crowd is stunned. The 65 win.
Curry, 33 points in the second half. And that'll do it. The Golden State Warriors advance to their 5th consecutive Western Conference.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode and video on the podcast. Now I would like to take a second before we get into today's video to thank everybody for listening and watching, all my listeners and viewers out there that have been along with me on this journey, because I started the podcast about a year ago last week. I didn't say it in my last video for some reason, but I did put it on my Instagram. But yeah, last week was the first year anniversary, I guess you could say, of the podcast, and definitely further than what I thought I would do. I mainly just started the podcast just to really get my sports views out there and really just kind of put it at an outlet and put it online and see what happens with it. And I mean, some great things have happened with the podcast, and I would like to thank everybody first for listening all the way through this journey, and watching all the way through, and watch the channel grow. It's just been great. And again, I mean, people sharing the podcast with other people, and really just spreading my takes out there, even though they haven't been the best. I have been a little roasted for my Cowboys prediction and my Nuggets in 6 prediction so far, which has not looked so great. So yeah, definitely my sports takes aren't the best, but I do like to make a little bit of bold predictions, and making those predictions to at least some audience is a little pretty good outlet for me, and it's been great so far for a year, and hopefully I can continue for another year and make it 2. And now moving on to a platform that has helped me for this year of my podcast has been Anchor. Now, Anchor is a podcast platform where you can edit and post your podcast anywhere, from your phone to your computer, from out in public Wi-Fi, mobile data, or just in your own home and with your secure Wi-Fi. You can just post your podcast from anywhere around the world. Doesn't really have to be, you don't even have to be on your computer where it needs Wi-Fi connection. You can just have your phone and then just post it from there, or even record it through your phone, which has been really great for, on the go podcast, where I don't really have all my setups, but I do have Anchor, who allows me to edit my platform, or not edit my platform, sorry, edit my podcast, and also just being able to add music, royalty-free music to my podcast, where so my episodes don't get taken down due to copyright strikes, and which has helped me continue this podcast for another year. And if you seem interested in making your own podcast, or if you just want to check out and experiment with it, I would highly suggest that go to anchor.fm, or you can head over to the Anchor app. Again, you can head over to anchor.fm or to the Anchor app and tell them Sports Stories Podcast sent you. Now, moving on from that sponsor, today we have the CP3 Curse. Now, originally I was going to go over the Michael Jordan first retirement, a little deep dive into that theory, but I believe 2 weeks ago I was talking to a friend, and we were talking about the CP3 curse, and that he cannot win a championship. Now, I will be going over in this episode like all the times that he's made to the playoffs through the the amount of teams that he's been on, but just for a quick rundown, just for the beginning of the video, the CP3 curse. I mean, Chris Paul, great player. And it looks like he may be in that group of players like Patrick Ewing, who has never made or has never gotten a championship in the NBA. I mean, Patrick Ewing, he did play in a pretty stacked era. I mean, mainly with that Michael Jordan three-peat and then another three-peat era. That was an era where you could not win. And, it was even worse that he was in the Eastern Conference, so he would have to play against Michael Jordan inevitably. And then I kind of say the same for Chris Paul. Not that it was a single person dominating the league, but multiple dynasties, as you'll see here. I mean, you got the Suns led by Steve Nash, Spurs with Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and in the later years, obviously he's playing against the Warriors dynasty, who is a dynasty. The Grizzlies. When I go through these type of teams that he's beaten and lost to over the years, you'll see that Chris Paul has had a pretty expansive career, and he's played with players that are now way out of the league, or he's played with players that have just played in their rookie contract. So it's kind of interesting to see how long Chris Paul's career has been, mainly due because he was drafted in 2005 and he's still playing. So his career is basically as old as me. So that was pretty crazy to see. But without getting too far into it, I guess let's just go ahead and get right into it. Okay, so now first starting off with obviously the year he was drafted, or actually no, not the year he was drafted, but the year that he was coming out of college, coming out of Wake Forest, from 2003 to 2005. He played 63 games, started in 62 of those games, and he averaged 15 points per game, 6 assists per game, and 4 rebounds per game, along with 3 steals per game. Now, Chris Paul was selected at 4th overall by the New Orleans Hornets, but later in 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck New Orleans, and so the Hornets were forced to play in Oklahoma City, which is pretty interesting how kind of rolled around in the later years where he plays in Oklahoma City. But definitely interesting there. I didn't know that the Hornets actually played in OKC for the first 2 seasons of Chris Paul's career. Definitely due to Hurricane Katrina, and that was really interesting from what I saw there. Never knew about that. But starting in 2005, the year before Chris Paul was actually drafted, the Hornets went 18-64. 18-64. Let that sink in. Now, Chris Paul coming out of college was labeled as one of the highest guard recruits next to Deron Williams, and many people argued on whose career would be better, Chris Paul or Deron Williams. I believe Deron Williams was picked with the third or fifth pick. I know it was either one directly before or after Chris Paul's selection, and so many people argued about who would be the better guard in the league. And it ended up being Chris Paul, definitely. I think, in my opinion, Deron Williams had a great career at the beginning of his career, but it hadn't really it didn't have the longevity that Chris Paul's had in the end. So that's why I would really go with Chris Paul to have the better career. But yeah, so the Hornets went 18-64. So now with Chris Paul on the team in 2005 to 2006, the Hornets had a record of 38-44, which definitely is better than 18-64. And Chris Paul was second on the team behind David West for most points per game with 16.1. Chris Paul led the Hornets with assists per game with 7.8, and was third on the team in assists per game with 5.1 rebounds per game. And that season he won Rookie of the Year, which definitely is the start of him being compared to Deron Williams and how his career would go later on. Now, with that Rookie of the Year, the Hornets unfortunately did not make the playoffs due to just a stacked Western Division, and consisting of what I said earlier: Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, Steve Nash, Mike Bibby, Josh Hart, Peja Stojakovic, Kobe, Carmelo, and Dirk. Those guys were all in the playoffs that year, and it's just really just a stacked Western Conference, so it was kind of hard for the Hornets to really make it into the playoffs. And now, so the following year in 2006 to 2007, the Hornets ended with a 39-43 record, so really just moving up by one game. The Hornets were able to get Peja Stojakovic in the offseason, I believe. He just left the Kings and then decided to sign with the Hornets. Now, Chris Paul ended third in points per game with the Hornets with 17.3, first in assists with 8.9, and fourth in rebounds with 4.4. And they missed the playoffs this season because, again, stacked Western Division, and just overall wasn't a great record. Now, moving on to 2007 to 2008, the first year in New Orleans, the Hornets actually had a record of 56-26 and ending up first in the Southwest Division. Chris Paul averaged 21.1, 11.6, and 4 rebounds a game. And Chris Paul led the league in assists with 925 assists and a win share of 17.8. This year, the Hornets beat the Mavericks in 5, with Chris Paul averaging 25, 12, and 6. The next season with the Spurs in the Western Conference Finals, the Hornets lost in 7 by Ginobili and Duncan-led Spurs. And Paul averaged in that series 24, 11, and 4, which is definitely worse than the Mavericks series. But as you can see here, this, I believe, is where it all starts for the Chris Paul curse. Now, Chris Paul makes it to the playoffs, and from here you'll see that he constantly makes the playoffs here. And in the playoffs, they win or they lose, but I believe that Chris Paul is cursed from winning in the playoffs, or at least winning a championship. He wins in the playoffs and then loses, and up to this point, he has not made the Western Conference he hasn't made the Western Conference Finals at this point in his career. I mean, it is still pretty far, or pretty young so it's not really too far into his career, but still has not made a Western Conference Finals game. And you can see the trend here once I go more over into his career. Now, in 2008 to 2009, the Hornets, kind of declined here. They went 49-33. Chris Paul averaged 22.8, 11, and 5.5. And Chris Paul led the league in assists again for a second straight year with 861. And the Hornets didn't make the playoffs. They did make the playoffs, but they lost in the first round in 5 against the Carmelo Anthony, Chauncey Billups, and Kenyon Martin-led Nuggets. And Chris Paul in that series averaged 17, 10, and 4. Now heading into the next season, 2009 to 2010, the Hornets finished the season with 37-45 record. Now for this season, Chris Paul only played 45 games due to a torn ligament in his knee. So definitely wasn't the best season for him and the Hornets. Chris Paul ended with 18.7 points per game, 10.7 assists per game, which actually led the team, and 4.2 rebounds. And this season, you can start to see Chris Paul's unhappiness with the team. They ended up firing head coach Brian Scott, who Chris Paul really liked. And later in that season, obviously tore his cartilage in his left knee. Sorry, not ligament, but tore a cartilage in his knee. So that kind of forced him to miss the season and ended up making the Hornets miss the playoffs. Now moving on to the 2010 to 2011 season, the Hornets ended with a 46-36 record and made the playoffs. Chris Paul was second in points per game with 15.9, first in assists with 9.8, and fifth in rebounds with 4.1 for the team. The Hornets exited the first round in 6 games against the Kobe and Andrew Bynum-led Lakers. Now, funny enough, in the start of the 2011 to 2012 season, there was a 3-team trade that actually tried to go through, and it's titled the Lob City Trade, which, the Lob City failed trade, I guess you could say, for the Lakers. It's that it was a 3-team trade with the Lakers, Hornets, and I don't even remember the other team. It might have been the Timberwolves, possibly. Don't really know. But the Lakers tried to get Chris Paul from the Hornets. They both agreed to it, but the Hornets at the time were actually owned by the NBA. They were not owned by any other team. So, and as a matter of fact, David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA, actually decided to veto the trade because they thought that it'd be a little too overpowering for the Lakers to get Chris Paul. That's basically the entire rule of the commissioner being able to veto a trade, is that if a team will kind of be too overpowered with this trade, then they just won't let it go through. And now this kind of has changed because there's so many dynasties, but those dynasties are mainly due to players requesting a trade or players actually signing. So I believe commissioners can't interfere with those types of trades, but just a trade not at the player's request, or that violates the no trade clause on their contract. I believe the commissioner cannot interfere with that. But so this trade to the Lakers, which probably actually could have earned Chris Paul a title for probably his first title in his career, actually ended up being vetoed and did not go through. So actually, about not even a week after that trade went through, the actual Lob City trade went through, which sent Chris Paul to the Clippers. And so the full trade details are the Clippers trading Eric Gordon, Chris Kaman, Al-Farouq Aminu, and a and a Timberwolves unprotected first-round pick for the 2020-12 draft for Chris Paul and 2 future second-round players, 2 future round second draft picks. So now the Clippers in 2011 to 2012 ended up finishing the season with 40-26. Now this record is kind of off mainly due to the lockout of the NBA at this time, which I might do a video on later. But basically the lockout season kind of limited the season's games, mainly because players didn't play. And so in this one, Chris Paul for the team was second in points per game behind a young Blake Griffin with 19.8. He led the team in assists with 19.1 and was 6th on the team in rebounds with 3.6. In the first round of the playoffs, the Clippers beat the Rudy Gay, Mike Conley, and Zach Randolph-led Grizzlies in 7 games. But in the Western Conference semifinals, the Clippers were swept by the Tim Duncan and Tony Parker Spurs. And that's where that season concludes. In 2012 to 2013, the Clippers went 56-26 this year and made the playoffs. Chris Paul ended second in points per game with 16.9, first in assists per game with 9.7, and 5th in rebounds per game with 3.7 for the team. In the first round of the Clippers, in the first round of the playoffs, the Clippers lost in 6 games to the Zach Randolph and Mike Conley led Grizzlies. So they ended up, the Grizzlies ended up getting their revenge against the Clippers for that first round exit the previous season. And then in 2013 to 2014 season, the Clippers ended 57-25 and made the playoffs. For the team, Chris Paul was second in points per game with 19.1, led in assists per game with 10.7, and was 4th for the team in rebounds per game with 4.3. In the first round, the Clippers beat the Young Warriors dynasty in 7 games. Now this one's pretty interesting to see because, as you can see here, the rise of the Warriors dynasty was just starting. I mean, they had young Steph Curry, young Klay Thompson, so young Splash Bros. Then they had Draymond Green, who was pretty young, Andre Iguodala, who was kind of experienced and kind of exiting out of his prime at this point. And really just that team that was starting to win games later on in the season. So it was kind of interesting to see that Warriors dynasty kind of build up throughout the years while making this video. Then later on, the Clippers lost in 6 to Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook Thunder. That was pretty also interesting to see, just the rise of these young stars now in the league. Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, the entire Warriors dynasty, just over the years, James Harden. So it's pretty interesting to see everybody kind of evolve throughout the years. And then in 2014, 2015, the Clippers ended with a 56-26 record and made the playoffs. Chris Paul averaged 19.1 points, 10.2 assists, and 4.6 rebounds. Chris Paul led the league in assists with 838 assists. And in the first round of the playoffs, the Clippers beat the Kawhi Leonard, Tim Duncan, and Manu Ginobili-led Spurs in 7 games. And then the Western Conference semifinals, the Clippers lost in 7 games to a James Harden and Dwight Howard-led Rockets, which another team that Chris Paul will played for later in the future. And now in the 2015 to 2016 season, the Clippers ended with a 53-29 record, and making the playoffs in this one. Chris Paul averaged 19.5 points per game, 10 assists per game, and 4.2 rebounds per game. In the first round, the Clippers lost to a Damian Lillard and Mason Plumlee-led Trailblazers in 6 games. That one was also interesting to see that Mason Plumlee was actually good at one point in his career. And then in 2016 to 2017, the Clippers ended with a 51-31 record and made the playoffs. Chris Paul averaged 18.1 points per game, 9.2 assists per game, and 5 rebounds per game. In the first round of the playoffs, the Clippers lost to a Gordon Hayward, Rudy Gobert, and Joe Ingles-led Jazz in 7 games, which was, again, pretty interesting to see Gordon Hayward with the Jazz again. That was a pretty long time ago. Just from looking at it, I mean, at the point where Gordon Hayward's career is at, him on the Jazz, where he was balling out with the Jazz, then he went to the Celtics, and then he went to the Hornets. So I mean, pretty crazy career for Gordon Hayward. And just remembering that he was actually on the Jazz at one point was pretty crazy. And so now moving on here to the 2017-2018 season. This was the season that he was traded to the Rockets for Patrick Beverley, Sam Decker, Montrezl Harrell, Darun Hilliard, DeAndre Liggins, Lou Williams, Kyle Wiltjer, and a future first-round pick, and as well as cash considerations. Now the Rockets ended with a 65-17 record. This year, James Harden won MVP, I believe, and made the playoffs, obviously. Chris Paul averaged 18.6 points per game, 7.9 assists per game, and 4.8 rebounds a game. In the first round, the Rockets beat the Jimmy Butler, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Jeff Teague-led Timberwolves in 5 games. And then in the Western Conference semifinals, they beat Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert-led Jazz in 5, which the Western Conference semifinals was a big hurdle for Chris Paul, as he hadn't won a Western Conference semifinal game up until this point, which had been already about 12 to 13 years into his career already. He hadn't won a Western Conference semifinals, but him and James Harden were able to make it to the Western Conference finals. And in his very first Western Conference Finals game or series, they lost to that Warriors dynasty in 7 games, which obviously, the Warriors would go on to sweep the Cavaliers in that series that year. Now heading into the next season, the 2018 to 2019 season, his last season with the Rockets. The Rockets ended 53-29 and made the playoffs. Chris Paul averaged 15.6 points per game, 8.2 assists per game, and 4.6 rebounds a game. In the first round, the Rockets beat the Jazz in 5 for the second time in a row. And in the Western Conference semifinals, the Rockets lost in a 6-game series against that Warriors dynasty, which, again, I kind of how Chris Paul and Patrick Ewing their careers kind of parallel here. I mean, Patrick Ewing having to play against Michael Jordan, and then Chris Paul having to play against, the Warriors dynasty. So, definitely was hard for Chris Paul to keep going up against that Warriors dynasty. But in 2019, this year, the Rockets would trade Chris Paul 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round pick swaps to the Thunder for Russell Westbrook. And the Thunder ended up being 44-28. Now, this season, I believe, was interfered due to COVID-19. So, obviously, the games weren't as many games as there were. But the Thunder were lucky enough to make it to the playoffs. And this was really Chris Paul's first season, besides being a rookie with the Hornets, where he was on a team that wasn't really that good and wasn't really looking to win any games. I mean, if you look at it, the Hornets, when they drafted him, really bad, and he kind of built them up there. And then once he went to the Clippers were looking to win now. They had a young Blake Griffin. They had a team that could really make it to the championship game, but they really couldn't get anything there. Then the Hornets looking to win. They had James Harden MVP that year that he made it there, and couldn't win a championship for them. And now with the Thunder aren't really looking to win. They're kind of a young team. At this point, they had Shea. Nobody really other than that. And So, I mean, as of right now, the Thunder aren't really that good of a team either. So, the Thunder were kind of trying to make a rebuilding team, and this was kind of Chris Paul's first time, besides with the Hornets, for being on a rebuild team. But besides that, Chris Paul averaged 17.6 per game, 17.6 points per game, 6.7 rebounds or assists per game, and 5 rebounds per game. Now, in the first round, the Thunder lost to Chris Paul's former team, the Rockets, in Game 7. He returned he didn't return, but he played against the Rockets again and ended up losing that one to see who would have had the best trade, who won the trade. And obviously the Rockets did. But the Rockets weren't able to get another championship, and James Harden left to go to the Nets, and Westbrook is now with the Lakers after his stint with the Wizards. And we all know how Russell Westbrook's career is going right now. And then in 2020 to 2021 season, the Thunder traded Chris Paul. So after only 1 year with the Thunder, Chris Paul was going to head over to the Suns alongside Abdel Nader to the Suns for Kelly Oubre Jr., Ricky Rubio, Ty Jerome, Jalen LeCue, and a 2022 protected first-round pick. And that year, the Suns ended 51-21 and made the playoffs. Chris Paul averaged 16.1 points per game, 8.9 assists per game, and 4.9 rebounds a game. And the Suns beat the Lakers in 6 games in the first round, making that LeBron's first career first-round exit, I believe. And then in the Western Conference semifinals, the Suns swept the Nuggets in pretty dominating fashion. Now, again, this is only Chris Paul's second Western Conference Finals game, and the Suns beat the Clippers in 6. Now, this is Chris Paul's first Finals appearance in about 15 to 16 years into his career. He had not made a single Finals appearance, and now with his first year with the Suns, led by Devin Booker, and I mean, that team last year was amazing. They finally made it to the Finals, but fell short against the Bucks, losing in 6, and pretty heartbreaking fashion for Chris Paul, as he did injure his shoulder in that Lakers series, which kind of bothered him, and his minutes playing, so he wasn't really able to play in that many playoff games. So definitely in heartbreaking fashion, his first Finals appearance. Now, as for this season, the Suns ended with a 64-18 record, the best record in the NBA this season. He averaged 14.7 points per game, 10.8 assists per game, and 4.4 rebounds per game. And at the time of making this video, I believe the Suns are up 2-1 in their first round series against the New Orleans Pelicans, which, again, New Orleans, pretty interesting. Interesting how everything comes around full circle with Chris Paul's career. And I believe they're playing again today. So, I mean, I have Suns in 5. Unfortunately, as for this season, my predictions, I have them losing in the Western Conference Finals. I don't think the Suns are going to make it to another Finals appearance. And hopefully, Chris Paul makes, another championship. Definitely making this video has made me more of a Chris Paul fan. And, maybe I wouldn't be too mad if the Suns made it to a championship series and were actually able to, make a run at that championship, and Chris Paul being able to lift up that trophy after about 17 to 18 years into his career finally, is going to be interesting to watch. If they do make it, it'll be nice to see if he does. But yeah, I am definitely more of a Chris Paul fan after making this video. And that'll be all for today's episode. Thank you all for listening and watching all the way through. Definitely looking at Chris Paul's career was really brought some more insight to why he is such a legendary player. And it does really bring up the question if he will be in that class with Patrick Ewing as legendary players who never won a championship alongside Allen Iverson. Tell me what you guys think down below in the comment section. Make sure you give a like, subscribe, and share this video or episode to anybody that you know that would be interested in learning more about Chris Paul's career. And that'll be all for today's episode. Thank you for listening and watching all the way through. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you.